Alright, welcome back guys. So we've sanded the Hotcoat on this XPS surfboard, and because this surfboard is pink in color, the foam, I didn't want to keep it that color. You could totally, but I didn't like that there's a line, as I reiterated previously, like where the foam got glued together. You can see the glue line. And there's some gouges and stuff that I filled in. So this video is going to be about artwork. Now traditionally how you would do artwork and paint and all that stuff, and it wouldn't even really technically be painting, although you could. They do tint jobs typically in the resin on more traditional boards. But what you can do is you can buy lamination paper for artwork, or I should say rice paper, I think they call it. And what this does is you can laminate this underneath. You place this underneath the lamination layer when you're doing the either the deck or the bottom when you're laminating the fiberglass on. So this goes underneath the fiberglass between the foam and the fiberglass. And once resin hits this, it turns crystal clear as well. So any part that is white without a design or logo or whatever you print on it, it'll just go clear. So leaving you with your logo or design. So this is really great. Works awesome. A bunch of my boards have all this. This board I'm probably going to forego that. The other thing is, typically on a traditional board, is they tint the resin during the lamination coat, and then they put a clear hot coat, gloss coat on top of it. So I have some tints here, and you just buy them in like little containers like that, or tubes, and you add that to your resin when you do the lamination. When you do that, it's really important that you mix up extra resin so you don't run out partway through, because then you'll get it's really hard to measure the same amount of pigment or tint in with your epoxy in order to get a consistent color throughout. So it's better to mix up more than you need just to ensure you don't screw up. So that's tinting and pigments. And the difference between tints and pigments are tints are typically lighter, whereas pigments, typically you get more of an opaque color to when you use it on the board for when you do the lamination layer. And the other thing you can do is you can paint the foam. So you can put paint directly on the foam and it'll just show through. That's really simple. You could tape, do a tape design. Sky's the limit. You can buy paint markers and write on the board. All kinds of things. Sky's the limit. You guys can figure that out. Now, what I do really want to emphasize is the type of paint to use. Use water-based paints. Do not use oil-based paints. Oil and epoxy, you're going to have adhesion problems. Now, I'm going to be painting this board with a primer coat, and then I'm going to paint it with toll paint or craft paint that you can get at Michael's, Walmart, Dollar Store, all kinds of places. So the stuff I'm using is just stuff I got at Michael's. And it works well. It's cheap. And I've also used, if you want to go with a crazy color that you want to get color matched, you can take a color into the paint store and get a water-based latex house paint. Preferably exterior because it has more UV protection in it, although the epoxy should take care of any fading anyway. It usually has UV blockers in it. And that's worked really well. You do not want to use any type of oil-based paint because the epoxy, you will have adhesion problems. And it's even better if, depending on the type of paint that you do use, to test it out. Roll out a little bit or spray a little bit and then put some epoxy on it to see if you have any adhesion problems. Do a small patch first. It'll save you trouble so you know whether to either use the paint or not use the paint. So, for this surfboard, I'm going to prime it, then I'm going to paint it, and that's all I'm going to do for art. I like to keep it simple, kind of tasteful. I've done funky designs for other people before. I've tried doing some funky designs myself. I've laminated stickers underneath the board. You know, sky's the limit, like I said. Do what you like. Be creative. This is the time that you can be creative. So, let's prep the board by wiping this down with some rubbing alcohol, or denatured alcohol, preferably if you can get it, to get rid of any dust. And then I'm going to roll the paint on with a sponge roller, like this, just because I don't feel like breaking out my sprayer, and I was kind of curious to see how well of a job this would do. You can spray it on, which I've done previously, which does a really great job. Spraying is probably your preferred method. I just don't want to because you got a gun to clean and it just makes a mess, and it takes quite a few coats because you have to put them on thin coats, or else you might see bleed through. So it's better just to maybe even roll it on. I don't know. I'm gonna try it and see what happens. I think it should be okay because the roller won't leave any brush marks, but we'll see what happens. Okay, let's get to it. So I'm just going to wipe it down with some rubbing alcohol. Get rid of the dust, any possible residual oils from your hand if you've touched it without gloves. The primer I'm using is this Zinsser product, water-based primer. It's good coverage, it's got super great adhesion, and it's just good quality all the way around. So I like this stuff, but you know, you can experiment, try different ones. This is what I have available to me, and that's what I use. Alright, now that the board is all painted the way I like it, I've removed all the tape. I've let this cure for about 4 to 5 days. It depends, the type of paint. Certain acrylic paints or house paints will take a few days, if not several weeks, to get up to full hardness. Otherwise, if you hit it with water, there's a tendency that it could peel, it could wash off even, which is unlikely, but it could. It's just a certain possibility. So what I suggest you do is let it cure, and then what we're going to do is we're going to wash this, because we need to wash the residual oils off of the paint after it sets, after it cures or hardens, because a lot of times, even though it's acrylic paint, there can be tendency to have some oils or some type of oily, waxy residuals in it. So what ends up happening is when you try to go to do the hot coat, another hot coat or gloss coat, what ends up happening is the epoxy will fisheye, or it'll pool in certain areas and it won't adhere to the paint. So that's super important. And I have some examples that I'm going to show you right now. You should always test whatever paint you're using by rolling it onto a surface and then mixing up some epoxy after it's dry to see if it will stick to it. So I'm going to show you an example of what happens if you don't wash the paint though. So I had some stuff just kicking around, like this old, I don't know, pizza peel thing that I had no use for. And I put some paint on it and I painted it all up to do the testing. A piece of wood, a piece of foam. So first, let's show you what happens if you don't wash. So as you can see here, if you don't wash it, you notice how it peels? How it doesn't... You notice here, if it's not washed, that it fish-eyed all over the place. So there's bumps and you can just see it here in the reflection. Not good. But on the other side, I just did red. Just so happened that I just did red on this side. But you notice that there's no fish eyes. It's nice and smooth. So, super important. This is unwashed. This is washed. Same thing on this block of foam. This has been washed. So no fish eyes, nice smooth. So I know that it won't peel. I know that when I go to do it on the board after I wash it, that I should get a surface like that instead of a surface like this, which would be very, very disappointing. So I'm going to take this outside, set it up, and give this a good washing. I'm going to be gentle with it though. I'm going to wear gloves, and I'm just going to mix up some detergent. I'm going to pour it on, wash it, rinse it off with cold water, let it dry, let it set for maybe a few more days. We'll come back, we'll do the another quote-unquote hot coat or gloss coat. It doesn't really matter. It's the same thing when you're using epoxy as opposed to if you're using like fiberglass resin. Those terms kind of come from that. Okay, let's get to it. I ran out of lamination paper, but I wanted to just put a quick little logo on this. So I printed out some logos on just some regular 8.5 by 11 white paper. And I cut one out, and I think it looks decent. I'm going to epoxy this on, just this little bit, and before I do the gloss coat. Okay, the paint job is done. So to recap what we did is I had to paint the board, or I decided to paint the board because after the hot coat, instead of painting the foam blank itself, is because there's a seam in it, because I built this board out of XPS board foam, construction foam, that I got at Home Depot. So I didn't like to have that seam, the glue seam, you could see it. I didn't like that. I don't like the color of the foam either. Now alternatively, you could paint the foam. take your time and not have to fill too many holes, although this foam has a tendency to not exactly sand as well as other foams. So it kind of gets a rough looking, so I didn't really want that. So I decided my solution is to paint the hot coat and then to put another coat of epoxy on top of it. We could call it a hot coat or a gloss coat. Using that terminology is actually more suitable for when we use polyester resin on a fiberglass board with polyurethane blanks. But anyways, this is an epoxy board, so we're going to put another coat of epoxy on this. I did the logo as well, so that's glassed on, or I should say epoxied on, so that when I do the next coat of epoxy, that'll sand and sit really nice. Now, I should mention that you could also use automotive clear coat. If you're happy with the hot coat and you don't have any sand throughs and the board is nice and strong and there's no weak spots, you could totally do your artwork, paint the board, and then hit it with automotive clear coat. I've done that in the past before. The only problem with automotive clear coat is that you have to be set up properly to spray it, and it's really toxic. So it's not really particularly great for you. So to do it in a residential setting is probably not a great idea. I have done it previously, and I've also taken some of my boards to an automotive body shop, and they've sprayed it for me as well when they're spraying a car. So I think that'll do it for this video. Use your imagination when doing artwork. You have to make a decision whether you want to do the artwork on the foam or you want to do the artwork afterwards. Preferably you want to do it during the foam stage, but you should check out my other video series where I make a retro single fin surfboard where I do the tint job on the actual fiberglass, and I laminate the logo underneath the lamination layer directly on the foam. So that's kind of the preferred method, but because we're not using, we're using more, scavenged, I hate to say, foam materials, building this out of XPS foam from Home Depot, I just kind of had to go with this route. So that's just some of my reasoning for why I did it this way. But you could totally do it whatever way you want. I'm just giving you some tools and information on how I'm doing it. So I think I'm going to stop here. The next video will be hot coating this, gloss coating this, and then after that we'll just sand it, and this board is done. It's ready to be ridden. So we're very, very close. So until the next video, thanks for watching, and the next video will be coming very soon.